Ladies and gentlemen, Three to God Way, P Dizzle Production. Let's ride. Drop top Chevys and the boys and the Lex and the girls and the X. Three to God Way tracks. And we bumping in your ear live every day. Hit your city, hit the stage, we ain't coming to play. Hey, mama told me, baby, take you to church. So I'ma bring the tambourine and I'ma take you to church. Clap your hands now, get up and dance now. Put on the garment of praise, here go your chance now. And if you feeling aggravated, get loose and let go. Take off your shoes if you want it, you can burn up the floor. And fucking Jericho dance and the Israelites dance and King David the man. So come on and clap your hands now.
So, Minister Walker, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in Harlem and those experiences?
Well, actually, it's a long story, and it goes all the way back to the late 60s and the early 70s when I grew up in Harlem. And it was really, really like a rough place to grow up in. You know, this was coming right out of the civil rights movement, and Martin Luther King was assassinated, and Malcolm X, they killed Malcolm. And so growing up as a little kid, we didn't have any heroes. Most of our heroes were murdered. And so I looked up to the drug dealers and the pimps and the guys in the neighborhood, the hustlers around in the neighborhood. So it was kind of difficult growing up in the ghetto. It was strictly ghetto in Harlem in the early 70s. And hip-hop came around sort of like a saving grace for me, because I was headed down the road, a path that was a path of destruction for my life. So for me, I think that God created hip-hop, and he gave us young kids during those days a way out of the ghetto, a way to achieve success, and to just forget about all of the oppression that was happening during that time. And in the early 70s, man, a lot of the buildings were being burnt down on purpose by the landlord owners in the South Bronx and Harlem. And it was just like a devastating like plague that had happened. You see, the landlord owners, they burnt their buildings down on purpose so that they could collect the insurance money. And it became a scam because, you know, New York was broke during that time. And the landlord owners couldn't get people to move into the buildings, so they burnt them down. They might as well burn them down so they can collect the insurance money. So it became like a domino effect. Every neighborhood, every block had a building being burnt down. And it was just incredible to see this thing happen. So a lot of the people during that time were poor, so they didn't have the money to move out of these buildings. A lot of people stayed in these abandoned buildings, these fired up, rubbled, just horrible living condition like buildings. And this is like one of the analogies or parables that happened with hip hop. This is where hip hop came out of, because there was a writer who did a story during that time. He said, you know, the buildings are burning down on one side of the street, but the kids on the other are trying to put something together. And that reminds me of graffiti, because the kids, they started writing on the walls and painting the walls of it because they were old, dilapidated, you know, rubbled up buildings. And so we started to paint on the walls and write on the walls to make the place look more beautiful. And it was like self-expression, saying, look, we live in all this rubble, we live in all this dirt, we live in all this mess, we live in all these fired up buildings and these abandoned buildings and all this dirt, but we're not dirt. And it was a way out for the oppression that was happening during that time. So for me, it was sort of like God sent a comforter, this energy, this spirit of hip hop to take us out of that degrading times in the 70s, in the early 70s.
Solas Cristas, Solas Cristas, Solas Cristas, Solas Cristas, Solas Cristas, Solas Cristas. Give me a little bit more, please. Without fear or hesitation, I proclaim the good news, hear my presentation. From the Bible, God's word, clear revelation. You can't earn paradise for sheer dedication. The great physician, he's got the spirit's medication. Christ's resurrection, not mere speculation. Check the evidence, it bears investigation. So the Christmas ideas and meditations. The Lord Jesus, exalted, eyes blazing, author of life and source of salvation. The power of his grace got me like, wow, amazing. And God raised him from the dead, so I'll praise him. Where in the world would I be without grace and mercy from him who laid the earth's foundation? Repent and be saved, because the time is now, pagans, thou nation, headed for annihilation. Courts come in, your birth certificate, the citation. The fool avoids the truth, thinking that denial saves him. Stuck on the net, cell phones and sky paging. A world of money, sex, fame, and clout chasing. Outrageous how flagrant the violations. What bugs me out about God is how patient he's been with us, considering the vile nature of our hearts and minds, which are inclined to follow Satan. My feet used to rush into sin without waiting. Regeneration made me do an about facing. 180 degrees later, I'm now embracing the Lord Jesus, who has become my salvation. Yeah, he has become my salvation. The Lord Jesus, he has become my salvation. Yeah, he has become my salvation. The Lord Jesus, he has become my salvation. Without fear or hesitation, I proclaim the good news, hear my presentation. From the Bible, God's word, clear revelation. He can't earn paradise for sheer dedication. The great physician, he's got the spirit's medication. Christ's resurrection, not mere speculation. Check the evidence, it bears investigation. Solar Christmas ideas and meditation. He has become my salvation. The Lord Jesus, he has become my salvation. Yeah, he has become my salvation. The Lord Jesus, he has become my salvation. My salvation won't be forfeited. Before the beginning of time, the Lord did it. Then he came to this earth to rescue his lost in it. And when he was done, he announced, 2,000 years later, this planet, I was born in it. Steeped in sin, I would always, till the spirit's effectual. I'm all with it, so now hell is, my vision is clear, my eyesight. I'm commissioned here by Christ. Sent to a perishing world to caution it. Repent to inherit this pearl. The warning is you reject the son, that's unfortunate. Consider yourself soon to be tormented. If riches and fame were really all it pretended to be, there'd be no need for the Betty Ford clinic. My backpack got tracks, of course, my sword's in it. Life is pointless without the cross in it. The crown of righteousness, your saints, we gon' get it. Hip hop for Christ, just the way the Lord meant it. Yeah, just the way the Lord meant it. Hip hop for Christ, just the way the Lord meant it. Yeah, just the way the Lord meant it. Hip hop for Christ, just the way the Lord. Without fear or hesitation, I proclaim the good news, hear my presentation. From the Bible, God's word, clear revelation. You can't earn paradise with sheer dedication. The great physician, he's got your spirit's medication. Christ's resurrection, not mere speculation. Check the evidence, it bears investigation. Sola Scripture's ideas and meditation. Just the way the Lord meant it. Hip hop for Christ, just the way the Lord meant it. Yeah, just the way the Lord meant it. Hip hop for Christ, just the way the Lord meant it.
Personally, who introduced you to music and personally got you started?
Wow, it was my mom. I have to definitely give the inspiration to my mom. My mom was an avid fan of music. She was a great dancer. She was the best dancer in the neighborhood. She was a slim, pretty woman, but she could shake a rug, and the neighborhood used to come and get my mom whenever they had, they were going out to parties or, going out to the clubs during that time, like the Harlem, the Renaissance and the Cotton Club and the Savoy Manor, clubs like that were, top clubs during that time. And whenever we had house parties and family gatherings and stuff like that, my mom would always ask me to play the music. And I was like 6 and 7 years old. So I used to, walk around to the family gatherings on the holidays, Christmas parties at the house and stuff, and all the family would be there. And here's little Kurt, walking around with a pen and a pad, taking down requests from everyone. And I go over to the component set. Now the component set is a big like box where you have a TV, a radio, a record player, and an 8-track cassette tape player. And so I would go over and get the 45s and stack them up just right and put them on the little knob that they had, and then the hook would come around, and then you saw the needle would just, come over and drop down on the record. And I was mesmerized by that. So I was the designated family DJ a long time ago. But I give all the inspiration to my mom. She was an avid fan of music. Even before I could write, the first things before I could read, the first things I was reading were the charts, the music charts. That's how I learned how to read. Okay. And so my mom was a big, great fan of Wilson Pickett and Sam Cooke and the Motown sound, and the Isley Brothers, and so I started my education through her. The soul music that was happening during that time, and I became a big fan of James Brown, and he was my hero during that time. So I owe it all to my mom and of course James Brown.
Okay. As you quickly became one of hip hop's pretty popular in the industry, what are like some of the pressures you had to deal with? I mean, was it smooth sailing, or was there a lot of conflict within yourself?
Well, there was a lot of competition during that time. Every neighborhood had their own DJ, had their own MCs, and see, during that time, disco music was the hottest thing. In the early 70s, disco music came out, and everybody was like, YMCA. but on the weekends, we'd go down to the clubs. See, everybody worked all week long, and on the weekends, we dressed up in suits and ties and went downtown to the clubs and paid your $5 and $10 to get into the club. But and we danced the night away. But during that time, see, I grew up on the soul music, on James Brown, and so I really didn't relate to the fast European thump of disco. It was monotonous to me. So there was this one cat named DJ Kool Herc who played the kind of music I grew up on.
Okay.
He played that James Brown music. He played the funky, obscure funk and soul music of the Motown sound and the Isley Brothers and Jimmy Castor and the Jimmy Castor Bunch. And this was like, he was a rebel to a world of disco. So naturally, the kids around our neighborhood, you know, we flocked to Kool Herc because he played the music we grew up on, the music we related to. And this is how hip-hop really spread. So, you know, during that time, you know, we didn't have the money to pay to get in to the clubs downtown, so we partied in our own neighborhoods. We partied in the gyms and the community centers and house parties and park jams and we partied on the block. That's when the block parties started happening.
Okay.
And we take police barricades and put them on each end of the block so the traffic couldn't go through, and the DJ would bring his sound system out on the street and hook up to the light pole and jimmy the sound system, you know, and get the electricity for free and rope himself off, and you had people come from miles around just to jam at the block party. So those times were really special times for me, and that's how I got started, you know, being one of those DJs out on the block in my neighborhood and just rolling around in Harlem in the South Bronx, going to block party park jams and making a name for myself. But there was a lot of competition. But as you can see, I'm still standing here. I'm still here, and God blessed me with the opportunity to actually become popular and successful in hip-hop in those early days.
Giving the thanks back to God, when were you able to make that transition from kind of in the secular music world to realizing your potential in God and what He had planned for you?
Well, it happened for me around 1992. That's when I became saved. Out in California. I moved out to LA with my family, and there was a minister. His name was Pastor Jack Hayford. You usually see him on TBN a lot, and his church was Church on the Way out in Sherman Oaks, in California. I remember going and getting saved and taking the altar call and that walk, and going to church every Sunday and reading the Bible, and then eventually it evolved to having Bible studies at my house, and it was just a wonderful, awesome time for me to have Christ in my life, and just an awesome power God is. And God's grace is irresistible. You know, He's been after me for a long time, but it took some amazing, irresistible, incredible grace to save a wretch like me.
All right, this is the Frontline Soldier back at you, and we just got through vibing with a couple of videos. Prior to the videos, we had Emmanuel with Minister Curtis Blow Walker. Curtis Blow, hip-hop pioneer. I know it was a real informative interview, and I want to thank Brother Emmanuel for doing the research, doing the homework to come up with those questions for Curtis. And I know that it's going to be a blessing to you all out there that are watching. You know, that hip-hop is not just about music. It's not just about hanging out on the street corner and spitting dirty lyrics, but you know, it began as a cultural art form, as a release to a lot of the things, the negative things that was going on in the inner city. Young people had to find something to keep from going crazy, keep from going mad because of the pressure and the conditions of urban